Today we have Tom Strutz with the McMahon Group to present the report and the study that was done throughout the summer to determine what you, the members of the community, are wanting and needing, and how the association can accommodate those wants and needs. The survey was very successful in that we had 1,409 surveys completed. Surprisingly, 900 of those were completed with the use of pen and pencil opposed to the online versions. That in relationship to the total number of eligible participants in the survey, I believe was 43%, which is a high percentile and a good indication of what the community at large feels as far as importance of various items that were related to the survey, as well as their value. So, not to steal Tom Strutz's thunder, but I wanted to introduce Tom back. Many of you may have attended the focus groups that we had earlier in the year. We had over 100 members that helped guide the McMahon Group in the questions that were asked on the survey. And of course, Tom is back now to review that with you and hopefully give the community good direction. And with that, I give you Tom Strutz.
Thank you, Edward. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you today on this beautiful day. I was telling Edward, if I had the option of coming to this on a Saturday afternoon or being out there doing something different, then I might choose the latter, but I certainly do appreciate you taking the time to come out today. I probably got about 30 minutes of slides to go through. Just a bit of background, those of you that are not familiar with McMahon Group. McMahon Group is a consulting firm based out of St. Louis, Missouri, and we deal only with private clubs and community associations. We've been doing that for 35 plus years, and in that time worked with over 2,000 clubs and communities across the country. And our primary focus is on strategic and long-range planning, helping those organizations kind of find out how well they're meeting their needs of their members today, and as they look to the future, what kind of plans they need to make to continue to be successful in the future. So a lot of what we do focuses, we start our engagements with a lot of organizations doing comprehensive membership surveys, which is what we are asked to do here. May eventually lead to some planning assistance, but all we've been retained to do at this point is to do what we did starting in April, doing the focus groups, and then conduct the comprehensive membership survey over the summer. And then I'm here today to present the results of that effort to you. The presentation that I'm going to show you is kind of divided into three separate sections. The first, just go through kind of an overview of what the response was to this survey, who responded, by demographics. Then get into a section that'll talk about, as the survey was structured itself, the survey was structured to first ask you about your existing experience, kind of your satisfaction with everything that the association is providing today. And then the next section of the survey really went into kind of where are we going in the future, strategic issues, facility-wise. So that's the way this will be structured. Most of you picked up a piece as you were coming in. It's my understanding that that will eventually be finalized. A few minor changes will be made to that. That'll be distributed to everyone within the community. There's also going to be materials online. We had basically a 2-volume report which we provided back to the board and management. This is 1 volume, and the other volume contains about 4,500 or so comments within the survey itself. There were various opportunities for written comments and suggestions, and as is the case at almost every organization, you had a lot to say. So that volume is about 4 times as thick as this. And if you have a kind of a rainy, crummy day sometime this winter and you got nothing to do, you can sit down and look at that. They'll have that, it's my understanding that that'll be put online as well as Volume 1 available in the association office if you want to see that. So the intention that I've been told is to be as transparent as possible and provide all of this information to you. There's nothing to hide, and so it'll be made available to you. I'll start with really the survey response. As Ed said, we had a good response with 3,271 possible surveys completed. We had 409 that were returned through a combination of either online or mailed-in surveys for an overall response rate of 43%. This is for a community this size, going into this, in our experience, we may have expected something into the 30 to 40% range. When we do smaller organizations, such as, say, a private country club, we'll be up closer to 50%, but when we get organizations this size, 30 to 40% is kind of the norm. So at 43%, that's a good response rate, and that provides really a high degree of confidence in these results, whether it's some aspect of the existing operations or facilities or something to do with where we're going in the future, plus or minus 2 percentage points on those response. So if I tell you today that something is 43%, 95% of the time, it would be within plus or minus 2 percentage points of that would be the true value if, in fact, we had been able to get all 3,000 plus to respond. And just a little bit of kind of the demographic breakdown of who responded by age. I see 18% really are under age 46, and then on the other end, you've got 36%, twice as many, over the age of 65, and kind of the bulk would be in those middle age groups, kind of between 46 and 65 is 46%. 28% of those who responded have children living at home. And the number of years a property owner, 14% have joined within the last 2 years. Most people, it's 51 to 70 some percent, have been here for at least 6 years, and half of all respondents have been here for at over 10 years. And we asked a question about what type of property do you own. The results were that 75% have developed property, 5% undeveloped, and then there were another 20% that had some sort of a combination of developed and undeveloped. We asked how long respondents thought they'd remain here at Hidden Valley Lake, and almost half, 46%, said they really have no idea. But most seem to say, you know, up to 13, 10, 13, 87% say they'll be here at least 5 years or longer. And now we'll get into a little bit of the existing satisfaction with what's going on here today. The very first question is on most of our surveys, we asked respondents to indicate their overall satisfaction with the Hidden Valley Lake Association. And they could take this a couple of different ways. They could take it just, well, just with kind of the administrative part of the association. The intention was really, though, that it was about kind of your whole experience here at Hidden Valley Lake. What we found, and this is where I need to say don't shoot the messenger, that you'll see the kind of greenish colored bar on the left of each one of these. That is the results from your survey. And then the blue bar is we maintain a database of other either associations or private clubs that are co-located with property owner associations. And so we have this database that will give you some perspective. But what this shows is that if you look at the two left bars, 29% of respondents to the survey said that overall they're satisfied with with their experience here and what's going on with the association. On the far right side, 38% are either dissatisfied or very dissatisfied. It is also kind of telling that only 3% of respondents said that they're very satisfied today. That compares to 35% at other clubs and associations. So overall, satisfaction, if you look at that, the left two bars, 29% are either satisfied or very satisfied. That compares to an average of 83% at other associations. So it kind of tells you there's some work that needs to be done to improve overall satisfaction here.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
How are you handling questions?
Oh, if you have a question on each slide, it'd be easier than backtracking. So if you have a question, go ahead and
Yeah, just quickly, and this is a good place to ask it, I think. How successful do you think you were in translating the comment sections into data points that ended up as a percentage point of notes?
well,
The comments are, they have to be translated.
well, the comment, they're handled completely differently. The comments are the qualitative part of the input, not the quantitative. So the comments, they supplement they don't influence this. If when you look at the report, and it's very easy to see if people are saying that they're dissatisfied, you can read through the comments and it just jumps right at it. And we'll be covering some of that, or a lot of that as we proceed. So this is just kind of the general. We'll be getting into more specific. Yes, ma'am.
I would just like to point out, in case anybody wants to do their dyslexic, the colors up there are in reverse of the colors.
Oh, okay. Yeah. There's our graphic designer in our office made this, and so yeah, they're yeah. I hope they're the same. Okay. I think we have multiple microphones in there, so if...
Who's next?
Okay.
Anyone have a question right at this point? Okay.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Just raise your hand if you do have questions, and I'll be happy to bring a microphone around.
Then the next question was, the next question on the survey had to do with the value proposition here. Agree or disagree? Do you feel that you're receiving good value for what you pay in your annual association dues for what you receive? And again, we're well below average compared to other similar organizations. Only 23% of those who responded either agree or strongly agree that they're currently receiving good value. That compares to 65% at similar organizations. And then on the flip side, 51% either strongly disagreed or disagreed with the statement that they were receiving good value, and that compares to 15% at other associations and clubs. Now we'll get into some of the more specific aspects of what goes on here, starting off with a question that asked about member satisfaction with various aspects of the board, governance, the committees, and then the next slide will get into management. Yes, sir.
Before we get ahead of things, on value for cost, the handouts show 10% strongly disagree. Your slide up at the handouts for receive value for cost showed 10% strongly disagree.
Yeah.
Your slide up there shows 17%.
Yeah,
so which one is correct, or what is the correct
right
number?
There. 1751. This one is correct. The one that's on the slide. Okay. Yeah, it's actually that, the one that we sent it to the association and hadn't really, but they wanted to have something as a handout, but thanks for pointing that out. We'll make sure we fix that. This is the one that's correct up on the slide. Now back to the question about board and committees and governance. What we really hone in on this, and I'll show you in a minute how this compares with other organizations, is the far right column. Generally, when we're working with any of these sorts of questions, anything that has a level of dissatisfaction above about 10 or 15%, that's kind of a red flag that, that an association needs to kind of take a look at. As you see for the board, communication, overall performance, responsiveness, whether or not they're representative of the membership, financial oversight, all of those have levels of dissatisfaction around 50%. And then somewhat lower for the committees with opportunity to serve at 15% and the overall effectiveness of committees at 33%. And in terms of management, in terms of communication, overall effectiveness and responsiveness, and this is management, meaning the staff and management as opposed to the elected board or committees. Those ratings, again, as you see on the far left, all these were on a scale of 1 to 5, so obviously a rating below 3 is something we would say needs to be improved, with levels of dissatisfaction from 31 to 37%. And this shows how these ratings compare to other organizations. All of them are well below average compared to our averages from other clubs and associations. We had a question in there about whether or not people had ever served on an association committee. Only 13% have, and 22% said they had an interest in serving at some point in the future. It was followed up by an open-ended question where we asked, you know, if you haven't served or if you have served, tell us about your experience or why you wouldn't want to participate. And there's a few comments that we pulled out that are representative of other ones from committees are asked to perform research and make recommendations, but most often the output is ignored. Committee meetings are held during the week and are impossible for those members that work out of the area Monday through Friday. And then currently too busy. We saw a lot of those similar type comments. People just have a lot going on and don't have time to volunteer. And we also heard when we were doing the focus groups back in April, similar type comments. The next section of the survey was on the CC&Rs, covenants, conditions and restrictions. All aspects of those from communication, to property owners and tenants and adherence, effectiveness of enforcement, adherence by tenants, consistency of enforcement. And again, this is really kind of a sore spot that again, we heard quite a bit about this when we were doing the focus groups in April, so this is not surprising that we got these results, at least to us, with 30 to 54% of people dissatisfied with those various aspects of the communication and the enforcement of the CC&Rs.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
In your experience, is there a question that was asked a different way or could have been asked about to determine community opinion on the, I guess, the legality of the CCRs themselves? In other words, is the perception of the community that they are correct, legal, consistent with like county code, that type of thing? Is there any way to...
Well, the only way we didn't ask is a question of that nature on the survey. So the only way... Yeah, I don't recall ever asking a question. If there's any commentary, you know, there were lots and lots of written comments. Members could have commented about that, but we didn't, and we, whether or not it would ever be a question that we would ask in such a survey, because most members are not lawyers and would not know, they wouldn't be able to answer the question, based whether it's legal or not. Overall satisfaction, this has to do with, you know, how well the association communicates with you today. Overall, 45% satisfied and 23% dissatisfied. I didn't mention before, but when there's a table like this, those don't add up to 100% because on our 5-point rating scale, there's a neutral in the middle. So if people really you know, on a scale of 1 to 5, if they just say, I give it a 3, or they really don't know, they would just put it through. So those don't add up to 100%. But overall, 23% are dissatisfied with the existing communications. Relatively high set, you know, with the newsletter itself. 2/3 are satisfied and only 12% are dissatisfied. So if there's a highlight, bright spot in this one, the newsletter got pretty good rating there. The lowest rating with only 29% satisfied and 32% dissatisfied was for your ability to provide feedback either to the association or to your board or to your management. We asked a question about, you know, going forward, how do you want the association to communicate with you? And is it the case today that we're finding is electronic forms of communication have become more and more important, and those that you see on the top 3, email, a newsletter sent via email, and the website are the top 3. But also in the top 5 there are other more traditional types of communication. Having a printed newsletter is important to 59%, and at general membership meetings like this is important to half of all residents. It was really quite a comprehensive, assuming most of you filled out your surveys. There was a question at the beginning, close to the beginning, that said, okay, you've got a lot going on here. Here's 30 different either facilities or amenities that are offered at Hidden Valley Lake. On a scale of 1 to 5, rate how important you feel each of these is to you, and then at the same time, tell us how satisfied you are with each of those. So it was a little bit too voluminous to put up 30 different ones on a slide. So what I did was I took those that members consider to be the most important. The top ones are rank ordered from the top, being the overall quality and condition of the lake. It's 87%. Included on that list are just the lake in general. Pool facilities and activities, 81%. A couple aspects of security, the gates and overall security, and then the big and little beaches. All of those are important to at least 75% of respondents. And then on the right side are the satisfaction percentages, satisfied and dissatisfied. And our recommendation is that especially for activities that are as important as those are to your membership, the goal should be to have levels of satisfaction of at least 75% and dissatisfaction at no higher than 10%, which was not achieved by any of those activities that are of highest importance. The rationale is that if you can provide high satisfaction in areas that are most important, it kind of drives overall satisfaction. There's a direct correlation between what's most important. If you're satisfied with it, then your overall satisfaction with the organization tends to go up. These next two, we call them our value boundary matrices, but it's probably a little hard to see. There's actually four quadrants: the upper left, lower left, the right, lower right, and upper right. And what it does is it plots the importance, what we were just talking about, for all those activities. And I've got this one, and then there were too many to put on one slide, so it's broken up into two matrices. What we really look at relates to what I was just talking about. Those on the right side, the lower and upper quadrants are, those are the most important activities for the membership. So the goal would be to get everything that's most important. As you go up to the top of this and to the right, you increase satisfaction. So the ones, and what you don't want, of course, is in the lower right quadrant where it says priority improvements. Those are the things that plot out with they're high important, but they have relatively low satisfaction. So those are the areas that you should concentrate on increasing satisfaction. And those include the pool facilities, the lake quality and condition, security overall, security gates, and the lake in general. Those would be high priority items that you would want to try to get improvements to move them up to that upper right quadrant. Yes, sir. So, albeit maybe a minor point, but didn't the lake, didn't the pool facility just open this spring maybe after this was, the survey was conducted, so that maybe that might change a little bit now with the new shower facility opened up? I think the answer to that question is it wasn't, I don't know exactly when it opened. We were here in April and they were doing work on it. I don't know, someone can help me. I thought it was May or something like that. Yeah, so I mean, you know, maybe, like I say, it may be a minor point or not a big deal, but it was just something I wanted to bring up that, you know, there has been a little bit of change in time since we did that. So. Okay, thank you.
I certainly think that that was one of the items related to shade at the pool that with the opening of the pool this summer that was relative to the survey as well.
Yeah, and as I proceed, we're going from more general at this point, and it'll go into individual activities to see, and it'll shed some light on if somebody said they were dissatisfied with swimming, then we'll go into some of the specifics of why they may have said they were dissatisfied.
I know you said you couldn't put everything up there, but I'm looking at the list.
Mm-hmm.
On page 3. And the golf course is up there higher than the tennis courts, but it's not on your list.
Well, there's another, this is another one that includes all the other activities that weren't on the previous one. Yeah, I don't know. Are you referring to the golf course and golf activities?
I'm referring to the page where it lists the amenity and activity, and then the mean and the percent important and the percent unimportant. And the lake is at the top, and then the pool, then security, then the beaches. But as you go down that list, golf is more important than the tennis courts. But the tennis courts are shown in that chart, and the golf course isn't. That's all I'm saying.
Well, the golf course and golf activities, do you see it up there? Let's see if I can.
Missed it.
Right
there. It is. Okay, sorry.
Okay.
There it is. Okay.
And in this particular, you know, this is, as you see, most of those on this particular chart are in the bottom left, which we refer to as missed opportunities. Those are things that are not as important. If they were enhanced or if satisfaction increase, they're probably not going to get any more important to respondents, but they may become what we would call significant enhancers if they could move up in higher in the chart. The only one that's in the priority improvements on this particular chart is are the beaches, the big and little beaches. And then that same list of 30 amenities or activities that I referred to you before, these are the ones that had the highest levels of dissatisfaction. I won't go through them all, but these were all the ones that had kind of levels of dissatisfaction above 20%. And as you see, as you get down to the bottom, those over 30% is the Hartman Center, the restaurant at 31%, and the geese control measures at 41%. Now to some of the more specific aspects of what the association provides, starting with the Hartman Center. This slide deals with the physical facilities of the Hartman Center, with the amount of space for casual grill dining, bar socializing area, private events and meetings, and outdoor patio dining. All of them had levels of satisfaction from 44 to 57%, somewhat elevated dissatisfaction. And this kind of shows the need, and it'll be reflected later on when we address kind of what members are looking for the future out of their dining operation. And we see that all over the country as there's a big demand for, especially in a nice climate area, to have outdoor patio dining. So 23% are dissatisfied with the existing amount of space for outdoor patio dining. And then in terms of appearance, those levels of satisfaction with all the aspects of the Hartman Center are considerably higher. Just the overall appearance of the patio and the Greenville room and the Mulligan's, the bar area, and the Greenview Cafe, 31 to 36% dissatisfied. And as a reminder, you know, these are all pretty high levels, in our experience, high levels of dissatisfaction. Whenever you get anything over about 10 to 15%, that's pretty significant in the organizations that we work with. And then from an operational standpoint, these are questions that related to the service and the food itself. All these ratings are in a range of the 3.2 to 3.5 with levels of dissatisfaction, especially for the food, from 22 to 26% for consistency and menu variety and the value of the food for the price. We did compare this to our database of other clubs and organizations, and all of those ratings are pretty well below average compared to other clubs and associations that have dining operations. Now, moving on to golf, to satisfaction, this is probably one of the highest levels of satisfaction that we encountered throughout the survey. Even though those ratings are in a range of 3.6 to 3.9, that's more a function of when we have this 5-point rating scale. What happens is a lot of people, if they're not interested in golf, or they don't participate, not familiar with it, rather than, and we encourage them to just skip the question, but what a lot of people do is they'll just go through and they'll mark all 3s, which tends to bring down the overall ratings and make them lower than what they would have been otherwise if those folks didn't even answer the question. So in the next slide that you'll see, well, back to that one. So what we really pay our attention to in this case is more so the level of dissatisfaction. And as you see, compared to what we've seen previously in other activities, the dining, the board and committees, that sort of thing, only 5 to 10% dissatisfied with what's being provided today in the area of golf. So that's actually a good survey result, even though, as you'll see on this chart, the ratings are below average compared to other clubs and organizations, but I think that's really more a result of kind of the overall size of your community and how many people actually don't play golf and weren't familiar with it and answered that question anyway. Swimming facilities and operations. The 2 items that stand out is, as we said before, and the gentleman pointed out that the facilities had been closed for a while and they were working on the bathhouse, so that could have had something to do with at the beginning of the survey where we asked people to kind of give their satisfaction overall with swimming. But as you see here, most of the ratings are actually not too bad. The only levels of dissatisfaction above 16% are for the availability of pool furniture. It's at 26%, and the amount of shade at 38%. And that's something that we see. Those are 2 items that we see at either at private clubs or organizations that have swimming frequently. The amount of shade is the lowest rated item on the list. Again, here's the comparison to our database. Again, all the ratings are below the averages from other organizations. And now we get into other aspects of the association and amenities that are provided, starting with the lake and the marina. Actually, especially, remember before we mentioned that the lake, either the overall quality or the lake itself, was among the highest or most important activities or amenities to respondents. And satisfaction is very low with, as you see, with levels of dissatisfaction from 35 to 54%, and especially so with the sediment control measures at 39% and the control of geese droppings at 54%. And then on to the marina. Again, there's quite a few people probably that don't use the marina, so again, we have relatively low satisfaction percentages, but on the right side of that equation, also relatively low, 9 to 16% levels of dissatisfaction. The beaches up on top, the lowest rated aspect is the availability of parking at 29%. And then the equestrian facilities on the bottom in operation, the availability of the equestrian trail. It's my understanding that at one point there was an equestrian trail, but it's kind of gone by the wayside. So I don't know if there's what you could do about that, but 21% said they're dissatisfied that it's no longer there. And this is, when we take all of those activities that I just covered, this is kind of a top to bottom of those, with the ones on the bottom being the highest levels of dissatisfaction. With those that we talked about before, those are in bold at the bottom. Some of them, especially the control of the geese droppings at 54%, sediment control in the lake at 39%. And those are, of all those items, these are the ones that probably need the most attention in improving satisfaction. And moving on, that kind of takes care of the member satisfaction with the existing experience. And now we move on to some issues dealing with future issues and strategic issues, potential future improvements. Well, one of the first questions we asked was, would you recommend, it was actually a statement, agree or disagree, would you recommend ownership property ownership at Hidden Valley Lake to your friends and associates? Overall, a slight majority, 59%, either agreed or strongly agreed. 27% disagreed or strongly disagreed. And 21% were kind of on the fence. Among some of the, as I said, there were 4,000 plus comments, not all of them on this subject, but those that we at least thought were most representative of the comments that people made when we asked them, why wouldn't you recommend it, or why would you recommend it? On the positive side, the things that we see are the housing prices, the quiet area, the lake, and the pool, safe place to raise a family, and it's affordable, good people, nice lake, good golfing, the clean air and pure water, slow pace of life, and uncongested roads, prices, amenities, attractiveness, safety. Those were recurring themes on that side of the ledger. Then on the other side, these were just very common comments that just kept reoccurring. Dysfunction of the board of directors, the continued increase in assessments, association dues are too high with no sign of increased stopping, poor management, poor past management, lawsuits, losses, security and the way CCNRs are enforced, board of directors in disarray, communications with membership very poor, amenities are in shambles, social media destructive. Those were all, many of those were things that I covered earlier when we were talking about dissatisfaction with various aspects of the association. A couple of unrelated statements that respondents were asked to either agree or disagree with. The first one was, I believe there's a direct relationship between overall quality of the association's amenities and the property values. Pretty strong agreement at 75% with that statement. And then the next one was, it's important for the association to provide the amenities, facilities, and programs that attract potential new owners to purchase property at Hidden Valley Lake. And again, 78% agreed that that's important. In terms of what the association offers in the way of dining venues or amenities, we asked respondents to rate the importance of various either dining styles or offerings. You see, almost all of those are important to majorities of those who responded. The only two at the bottom that are not are a separate family dining area and upscale dining, both of those that are important to 31%. But all the others, and the two most important, of course, are dinner and lunch service, and then moving down from there, the outdoor patio dining area, breakfast, casual dining, and a sports bar or pub. All of those are important to majorities of respondents. We had an entire section on potential future improvements and asked people to rate the importance, and it was divided up into sections. I'll go through each of those sections to show you kind of how the results were, and at the end I'll kind of summarize what overall the most important were. From a community standpoint, the ones that you see up there and in the slides that follow that are in bold and are shaded are those that were rated important by a majority of those who answered their surveys. So adding sidewalks where possible is important to a majority, 55%. And those that are in bold but not shaded are important to at least over 40%. Additional hiking trails and RV lot. And when you keep in mind some of these things, even when you get down to the bottom of the list that says expanded dog park, that it's some may say, well, it's only important to 34%. Why would we do anything that's important to really a minority of the members? 35%, 34%. But when you look at the numbers here, and you take 34% and you put that either against the total membership count, the total number of households, it gets up to some pretty big numbers. So if something is important to 34%, you know, if you've got, what do you have here, Edward, 6,500 people that live here?
Population-wise, right.
Yeah,
and,
so if you look at it that way, then there's 2,000 people that would say that that's important. So we're just saying that just because it doesn't have majority support doesn't mean it's not something you would do. If it required majority support, you wouldn't have a whole lot here other than a few things. You'd have a lake and everything else would be minorities. In terms of the lake and marina, is based upon, and normally there's a correlation in the previous part of the survey where we ask people their satisfaction, and those things that have low satisfaction, high dissatisfaction usually kind of come out as to high priorities in terms of what you need to improve. And if it's not surprising that dredging the lake and removing the accumulated silt is important to over 2/3 of those who responded. Potential future improvements as related to dining. The three most important are a large banquet area, and that was described in the survey of having kind of events like this, for having banquets, golf outings, a number of different activities that require a significant amount of space to get large groups of members together. Casual sports bar and pub area is important to 47%, and more space for outdoor patio dining, that again is important to 41%. And from recreational activities, the only one that has a majority support, and this was somewhat surprising because I don't think we had a lot of discussion about this in the focus group, but 57% responded to their surveys that it would be important to have some sort of a year-round swimming pool. And I'm going to backtrack just a second. As you and others were filling out their surveys about what was important, what wasn't important to them, there was no discussion at that point in the survey of how it was going to be paid for. But later on, in the subsequent section on the survey, there was some discussion about the association has a reserve fund, and that reserve fund can be used for replacing existing facilities, certain facilities, but not necessarily for new facilities. So how you would address the issue of a year-round swimming pool, whether it would just be heating the water, keeping it open, whether that would be an operational expense, or whether, if you were to build some sort of an indoor swimming pool, it's my understanding that that would be considered as a new facility, so that would have to be explained at some point if that was the route that the association decided how they were going to address, how they were going to provide this. If it involved building a new facility, then there might not be 57% that said, yeah, it's important if I'm going to have to pay more for it, as opposed to coming out of the reserve funds. Other things at the top of the list are a teen center, children's activity center, fitness studio for group exercises, classes, fitness facility itself. And I'm going to show you in a few minutes, just on the next slides that follow, that there, as you might expect, there's differences in demographic segments as to if you have kids at home, probably having a teen center or a children's center is more important than if you don't have kids at home. So I'll give some examples of that in just a minute. Now this is just a recap of what I went through. These listed on this slide are the only three of all those potential improvements. These are the three highest priority potential improvements important to majorities. Dredging the lake, providing a year-round swimming pool, and adding sidewalks where possible. All of those are important to majorities of respondents. Next are those that were rated important by 40 to 49%. I won't go through and read all those. You can kind of look to see what those are. And then finally, so if at most organizations it comes down to priorities, this will be information that will be helpful to you and also to your leadership at some point when it comes time to start developing a long-range plan. What do we, most places you don't have the funds to do everything at once, so where this will be very helpful, we'll be saying, let's look at those things that are most important to our membership and find a way to kind of tackle those first. And then what you do is you say, how much funding do we have? Let's look at the things that are most important and how far down that list that we can go to address those things that are most important, the highest priority. So this will be helpful to your organization as you go forward, really understanding what is important and what's not important. And as I said before, sometimes you may decide to do some things that, say, are not as important to everyone as they are to people who moved here recently or people with young families. If you make that determination that those are the people that are going to be buying our homes when we want to sell our homes and we want to provide something that's going to attract them to our community. So sometimes either clubs or associations decide they're going to make improvements. If you know that most people moving in your community are younger and they have kids at home, then you may decide, even though the majority of people don't think they're going to use it, maybe you decide you're going to make improvements that will attract those, whether it's a teen center, a children's activity center, improvements to the pool. And the same thing happens at private country clubs. At private country clubs, a lot of times they have an older demographic than you, and they make conscious decisions to make those sorts of improvements because they know that in private clubs anyway, that 75% of those that join clubs do so under the age of 50. So if you want to attract them, then you need to have, and earlier in the survey, we asked the question, as I went over before, that how important is it to provide the facilities, programs, and amenities that are going to attract future owners, and 75 or 78% said, yeah, that's important, we need to keep our eye on that. But here's some examples, and there's, within the survey report itself, there's some detailed data tables that break down responses by age group and by whether or not, by how long you've lived here or own property, whether or not you have kids at home, those sorts of variables. And so there's a wealth of data in there, and I just picked out some of that, such as adding sidewalks, as I mentioned before. It's important to most, 55% of all respondents, but those, the youngest group, it tends to be more important. It's important to 72% of those under age 46. Having more pocket parks, although it's important to 38% of everyone, that's important to 54% of those that have children living at home. Providing space for a community garden, important to 35% of everyone, but among those who have moved here most recently or purchased property most recently, it's important to 47%. And what we see, whether it's a club or an association, although we didn't do a survey of those who are on the outside looking in, this group of those that joined or purchased property within the last several years, they'll provide a fairly good proxy if they decided to come here within the last few years. They provide, in our opinion, a pretty good window of those that may be considering joining. So if you look at how they responded to the survey, then you may decide that you want to put a little bit more emphasis on some of the things that are important to them, because their friends or associates may have the same opinion. Wi-Fi coffee lounge was something that was rated 37% of all, but among, again, those that have purchased most recently, that'd be important to a majority, or 52% of those folks. A large banquet area, that's important to, again, that would be for events and for meetings, gatherings, those that golf frequently, that tended to be much more important, and obviously they tend to get together as a group and have golf outings, whether that be for themselves, or sometimes you have golf outings that are revenue generators of people that are non-residents, non-members, and for those folks as well. Fitness facility was important to 41% of everyone, but again, higher in importance to those who have moved here most recently. Year-round swimming pool, 57%, is important to majority, but it's even more important to the youngest, under age 56, that's 72%, and a teen center, as might be expected, that's more important to those whose children are living at home, 59%, than to those, than to the entire group of respondents. And last but not least, how do we pay for this? As I said before, there was a lead-in to the funding part of the survey that said, okay, if we want to do some things here, if there's support from the membership to do things above and beyond what's in the current reserves, or if there are some things that are designated as new facilities or types of facilities that would not be covered by the reserves, then there would be a need for people to chip in, and there were some examples given in the survey about how much, for every $10 or $20 a month, or for every one-time assessment of $1,000 or whatever it was, it would generate X amount of dollars towards improvements. What we found was that a slight majority, 54%, said that whatever improvements are made should be funded from the existing reserves, and they really weren't willing to pay any more than they're paying now. But it's notable that 46% said they'd be willing to pay something. Most of those would rather do that, and it's not surprising. It happens all over that they'd rather pay something on a monthly basis as opposed to writing a one-time check. That's the most popular, whether it's the top-of-the-line country club. They are always willing to kind of pay a little bit more at once rather than writing a one-time check, and just kind of pay as they go. And there were a few comments. We asked a follow-up question on funding just to get their comments on paying for improvements. And here are some that were very common responses. We pay enough already. Fund improvements using existing revenue sources. I think there were some of those that said, yeah, we need to do more, and said they'd be willing to pay more. I think the time has come for a one-time assessment. Nothing gets done, and I feel we need to improve our property values, don't go into debt, live within our means, and stay in a budget. And that comes to the conclusion of my presentation. I'm happy to answer any additional questions that you have. Oh, we have a question.
I was just wondering, thank you. Thank you so much for all of this information. I think it really gives us a great understanding as far as where we are as members of the association. My question is, it sounds like you have several different tiers that you're going to be doing in helping our association just from your opening statement. And don't take this offensively, I'm sorry, but how much is that going to cost the homeowners? The reason that I ask that is because when this was introduced to us, it had said that the survey was going to cost around $30,000. And then in conversations with administration and other people, I've heard that it's been approved up to $200,000. So my question is, how much with everything that you are going to do, what is the contracted amount, and what do you think overall we as an association are going to pay for the survey? And for your contracted fees, which, thank you for the survey, it looked great, so
okay.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. And Edward might know even better than I haven't reviewed the contract yet, or even know if we've engaged to move on to do other things at this point.
The board did approve additional funds for the next stages of the process. However, we can always stop where we are and assess and determine whether we want to move forward. Of course, one of the anticipated actions that the board will make is the appointment of a facility planning committee, and they would work with the McMahon group if we choose to go that direction and come up with a conceptual design. Once the conceptual design has been developed, then we would determine cost associated with that design and be back before the community to have you take a look at what the committee and the McMahon group has prepared, and then open it up as far as moving forward as a possibility for architectural and engineering of the design. So there are various stages. I believe there are 4 stages that we would go through with the McMahon group, and each of those have different costs associated. The board agreed to up to $200,000 for that.
And I'm not trying to dodge, I just simply, I'm head of our market research and survey division, so I'm not intimately familiar with the other phases that were proposed. And if I had that in front of me, I'd be happy, and we can. Okay. Yeah.
My pleasure. Steve?
You referred to conceptual design, but conceptual design, does that mean of everything or conceptual design of something in particular? You just referred to it as conceptual design.
Well, it's my understanding that the next phase would be involved in developing a master plan of all the, kind of studying all the facilities and develop concepts, and that what would normally come from that after that master plan is developed is that a decision would be made, and that would be broken up into phases and say, okay, what are we going to do first, and then move into kind of developing the initial phase of the improvements, whatever they may be.
All right, so it would be, here's according to that, sidewalks, here's where we do sidewalks, here's where we could do something to the, the beach or the seats or whatever it might be. So it's a whole master plan concept. That's conceptual.
It could be.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm just wondering if any of the outcomes from the survey change anything, any plans in mind, or any priorities that existed before the results of the survey. If there's any large issues that have come up that might change some direction for the board, for the administration.
I think it's a little early to give that statement as far as what we have experienced recently with a number of items that were related to our reserves, and having to work out a funding plan to accommodate various items that are already in consideration.
Yeah. Thank you. A great presentation. Appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
Is maybe too early for this question, but as we go through those stages going forward that you described, is there anything you can tell us about what the communication strategy would be, or the back and forth to provide transparency and awareness to the community? So as things go forward and develop the step, how are you going to let us know about it, and we back and forth, that type of thing?
The question is directed to me, I take it? Or to Tom? Or yeah. Their firm is not involved in that aspect. That would be a decision that the board and staff would make, and recognizing from the survey that there's a need for improving our communications, and it would, yeah. We could also bring in a PR company to help us with those communications to make it more effective. But yeah, there's certainly opportunity for us to utilize, just as we're doing today with the videotaping of this town hall meeting. We'll be sharing that on our website and continuing to give updates as we move forward in the process. And so, yeah.
Yeah, a little bit earlier, you started talking about the facilities planning, and all at once, to my ear, it sounded like it was becoming all-inclusive, or, you know, the idea was that it become all-inclusive. I have some concerns about that. Given the focus that we've had over recent years on trying to get our act together in terms of the Hartman building, the community center, and the maintenance building, I would like to suggest that if we even consider taking, you know, too big a bite, we're going to have some problems. So I would hope that our initial focus would be, when we talk about facilities, would be on solving the problem having to do with those 3 bills, which we do have in the reserve study. Thank you.
I'd just like to offer a suggestion that might help when you start talking about improving communications with the members. Davis Sterling says that we're allowed to request that we get our information through email. And since you put the views on hvla.com as a PDF, there's no reason you have to mail me one of those slick, high-cost publications. I mean, I know you have to do some things for the weed abatement required by law, blah, 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 but I think we should, as a group, ask our members for suggestions on how we could cut some of those costs but still keep the realtors happy with information to provide prospective buyers. But I could get 9/10 of what you send me by email, and you wouldn't have to mail me anything.
We would love to do that. Unfortunately, not everyone is tech savvy as yourselves, and you know, that was one of the questions in the survey preferences. You know, whether you would like you know, hard copies versus you know, text messaging or other means of communications, and there's still a strong indication that the community prefers to have something tangible that they can hold in their hand. Yes, it is an expense. However, keep in mind that we have advertisers in the community that offset the cost of that. So it's a pretty inexpensive cost to add another layer to our communications.
Sorry, I have another question. Edward, when you were answering a question, somebody had asked you about the plan for the paying back some of the different monies borrowed from our reserve funds. And so this is my question. I had the opportunity of attending the board meeting on Thursday, and there was a budget that was passed, although it wasn't reviewed. And so I don't know what is in there. I guess I need to go down to the association and have it in my hand. But with that said, I'm a little bit concerned, and I just thought maybe you could answer this, that you made the statement that there's still some planning going on with the reserve funds. One question is, shouldn't this have been done prior to extracting that money based on Davis Sterling Act? The second question I have is, when you did the budget that was approved on Thursday, was all of that taken into consideration when you passed the budget, or are there still some more, I guess, budgetary numbers that we really don't know, and that the budget really isn't true as we saw on Thursday? I hope I answered all that.
The budget process is complete, including the reserves. We did conduct our 3-year reserve study back in late spring, early summer, and even though we had various scenarios that were discussed as far as availability of information, we had 2 joint meetings of the board and the Finance Committee in a workshop setting, and then we had 3 Finance Committee meetings reviewing the budget in various stages, and of course there were considerations given as far as the contribution that you'll be making next year to the reserves, as well as how the various items, the projects will span over the 30-year period. There were considerations in the current year reserves that we see that are not happening, and there are some things that we didn't anticipate. Obviously, $1.5 million payout for a lawsuit wasn't something that we had planned on, but we dealt with it, and there is a payback of that included in the reserves. And our contribution actually increased by about $150,000 over what we had forecasted for last year, and we're showing that the balance in the 30-year period is not going down below $1 million. So we're in pretty good shape, and no, there are no changes after the board approves the budget, and the budget includes the reserves.
Could you answer the other question? Were we supposed to have a plan before we borrowed the reserve funds, and were we as members supposed to have a good understanding as far as what the plan is and how we're going to pay that back? Because as of today, I still don't know, and I talk to a lot of younger families that don't have an income like I do, and they're really concerned that they're going to have a special assessment or their assessments are going to go up. I mean, there's a lot of unknowns, and we're a little bit concerned, and I think that this presentation kind of shows that because of the lack of communication to us. So those are specific questions. Should we have had a plan?
Okay,
Where
to
is
answer
the
that
plan?
question, okay, yes, we did have a plan. It was in the
Prior
form of a resolution that was adopted by the board back in, I believe, May. And the board recognized that we would be borrowing the funds from the reserves and then paying it back. We are going to be making some changes to that resolution as far as the amount that the board recognized in the resolution to be paid through the reserves, as well as the payback period. We have up to a year, as well as the board has the latitude to extend it an additional year. And in our calculations for the reserve study, we did factor in 50% of the amount to be paid in 2019 and the balance in 2020. Which is all within the scope of the reserve study and the funding model. Does that answer all your questions, or?
I asked where did you communicate to us what your plan is?
The plan is in the resolution, okay, so you're welcome to see the resolution that was adopted. Yeah.
Okay, I've got one. One of the previous questions touched on the 3-building issue that the community faces, and in fact, there was a lot of talk beforehand that this survey was going to provide information to help the board and the community reach a consensus on how to address the 3-building, 3-building plus lake, I should say, address that large expense. In the survey, there was no explicit question concerning the community center, and the results that we saw today reflect that. How are you planning to incorporate? How are you planning to consider the community center in using these survey results?
Well, I would say that as we do in most surveys, we try to stay away from asking members to vote at that time on specific solutions as to how we address needs. The purpose of the survey is to find out really conceptually what kind of community you want this to be, what type of activities, what types of spaces are important to you, and what you want to be provided. Because we don't expect you to be experts on how to do that. What we would say is that that will, of course, be addressed in the next phase when a planning committee and, guided, assuming we're going to be working with the association on this, would be to look at potential solutions to see what would best provide those facilities and activities, whether that would be in one facility, two facility, whether it would be where Hartman is now, whether there'd be a separate. So those would be more in terms of what the best solution would be and how to provide that. What we've established from the survey really are priorities in what association members want and thinks important to be provided. Then the next phase would see how's the best way to do that.
Thank you. I'm wondering whether most respondents answered every question on the survey, or did you find that there was a tendency to only answer portions of the survey that they might be particularly interested in?
Oh yeah, we always find that, and we would prefer, I'll just give you an example. When we were asking questions about, say, the effectiveness of the General Association management staff, every single question, we have data tables that show how many people answered each question. So there were 1,175 that answered that question. And then later on in the survey, we had specific questions, say, for instance, the swimming questions. There were 800 and some that answered questions about swimming. And then tennis, there were only 600 and some. So people tend, and that's what we would prefer them to do rather than answering the question if they really don't know about it. So people kind of come and go throughout the survey and skip sections.
I thought that would be the case, and in that case, I have a comment that I think would improve our understanding of the results, that if you had in each section the number of respondents that the percentages represent, because as you said, tennis, there's a relatively small group of people who use the tennis courts.
Right.
There's a relatively large group of people who use the lake, and so on with all of our amenities. But when we look at percentages that as you presented them, it gives us no sense on how many members does a particular segment of the survey and their approval or disapproval represent. So I would find that very helpful if that were included in your survey results.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Actually, the data tables that he's making reference to will be available, so you can work through those algorithms and make some determinations, which I'm sure that, I'm sure the board will, be looking at that, as well as our facility planning committee, and those are certainly good things to know. And if you look at the entirety of the survey, there are a lot of variables and a lot of things, of course, that we can't cover in a 2-hour town hall meeting. But I'm sure that we'll have a future discussion on that.
Will those be online?
They will be.
Okay, well, I think we've exhausted you. So, again, thank you very much for taking the time to come out today. Appreciate your attendance, and we look forward to working with you going forward if that happens to be the case.
Thank you very much, Tom. We appreciate your being here and look forward to continuing.